I studied economics in college when I was young, and I learned there about a man named Ibn Khaldun, who lived 1,200 years ago in Egypt. And 1,200 years ago, he said, in the beginning of the empire, the rates were low, the tax rates were low, but the revenue was great. He said in the end of the empire, when the empire was collapsing, the rates were great and the revenue was low.
Al-Muqaddimah, the Introduction to History and Sociology by Abdurrahman Ibn Khaldun. Part 1. Preface. On the virtue of the science of history and the verification of its doctrines, and a glimpse into the misconceptions that historians encounter, along with a mention of some of their causes. Know that the art of history is a noble craft with many benefits and a lofty purpose, as it informs us about the conditions of past nations in their morals, the prophets in their conduct, and the kings in their states and policies. This allows for the benefit of emulation for those who seek it in matters of religion and the world, as they need various sources, diverse knowledge, and a keen insight and verification that lead them to the truth and protect them from pitfalls and deceptions. Because if news relies solely on mere transmission, without the principles of custom, the rules of politics, the nature of civilization, and the conditions of human society being applied, and if the absent is not compared to the present and the past is not measured against the current, one may not be safe from stumbling and missteps, straying from the path of truth. Historians, interpreters, and leaders of transmission have often fallen into errors in narrations and events due to their reliance on mere transmission, whether trivial or substantial, without subjecting them to their principles, comparing them to their counterparts, or testing them against the standards of wisdom and understanding the natures of beings. They have misled themselves from the truth and wandered in the wilderness of illusion and error, especially in counting numbers of wealth and armies when presented in narratives, as these are prone to falsehood and a vehicle for nonsense. It is essential to refer them back to the principles and subject them to the rules. As Al-Mas'udi and many historians have reported about the armies of the children of Israel, Moses, peace be upon him, counted them in the wilderness after allowing those who could bear arms, specifically those 20 years and older. They numbered 600,000 or more, which overlooks the estimation of Egypt and Syria and their vastness for such a number of armies, as each kingdom has a share of the garrison that can accommodate it and fulfill its functions, while being limited in what exceeds it, as evidenced by the known customs and usual conditions. Moreover, such armies reaching this number are unlikely to engage in a march or battle due to the limited space of the earth and the distance between them, if they were to line up beyond the range of sight 2 or 3 times or more. How could these two groups fight, or one of the lines gain the upper hand, while some of its sides are unaware of the other side? And the present witnesses this. The past is more similar to the future, like water to water. The Persian king and their state were much greater than the kingdom of the children of Israel, as evidenced by what happened when Nebuchadnezzar defeated them, devoured their lands, took control of their affairs, and destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem, the capital of their religion and sovereignty. He was one of the officials of the Persian kingdom, said to be the governor of the west from its borders. Their kingdoms were in Iraq, Khorasan, and beyond the river, and the gates were much wider than the kingdoms of the children of Israel. Nevertheless, the Persian armies never reached such a number, nor anything close to it. The largest gathering they had at Qadisiyah was 120,000, all of whom were leaders, according to what was reported by Saif, who said that their followers were more than 200,000. According to Aisha and Al-Zuhri, the forces of Rustam, who marched with Sa'ad at Qadisiyah, were only 60,000, all of whom were leaders. Furthermore, if the children of Israel had reached such a number, their kingdom would have expanded, and the scope of their state would have widened, as the labour and kingdoms in states are proportionate to the garrison and the tribe maintaining them, whether few or many, as we will explain in the chapter on kingdoms in the first book. The people did not expand their kingdoms beyond Jordan and Palestine in Syria and the lands of Yathrib and Khaybar in Hijaz, as is well known. And also, those between Moses and Israel are only 4 ancestors. As mentioned by the scholars, Moses, son of Amram, son of Yashar, son of Kohath, with the H pronounced open and closed, son of Levi, with the W pronounced open and closed, son of Jacob, who is Israel. This is how he is referred to in the Torah. The period between them, as reported by Al-Mas'udi, states that Israel entered Egypt with his sons, the tribes, and their children when they came to Joseph, totaling 70 souls. They remained in Egypt until they left with Moses, peace be upon him, to the wilderness for 220 years, during which they were ruled by the kings of the Copts from the pharaohs. It is unlikely that the lineage would branch out in 4 generations to such a number, even if they claimed that the number of those armies was during the time of Solomon and after him, which is also unlikely, as there are only 11 ancestors between Solomon and Israel. Solomon, son of David, son of Yash, son of Obed, also said to be son of Oved, son of Boaz, son of Salmon, son of Nashon, son of Aminadab, also said to be Haminadab, son of Ram, son of Hezron, also said to be Hazar, son of Perez, also said to be Baraz, son of Judah, son of Jacob. The lineage cannot branch out from 11 children to such a number as they claimed, except perhaps to 200 or thousands, which might be possible. However, to exceed that into larger numbers is unlikely. Consider this in the present, observable, and well-known context, and you will find their claims false and their reports fabricated. What is established in the Israeli accounts is that Solomon's soldiers were 12,000 specifically, and his close aides were 1,400 horses tied at his gates. This is the correct information from their reports, and one should not pay attention to the myths of the common people among them. In the days of Solomon, peace be upon him, and his reign, their state was at its peak, and their kingdom expanded. We find that all people of the time, when they discuss the armies of the states of their time or close to it, and when they talk about the news of the armies of Muslims or Christians, or when they begin to count the revenues and taxes of the Sultan and the expenses of the affluent and the goods of the wealthy, they delve into numbers and exceed the limits of what is customary, yielding to the whispers of the Bedouins. When the officials inquire about their armies and investigate the conditions of the wealthy in their goods and profits, and clarify the habits of the affluent in their expenditures, you will not find a tenth of what they claim. This is only due to the soul's fascination with the strange and the ease of exaggeration in speech, and the negligence of scrutiny and criticism, to the point that one does not hold oneself accountable for mistakes or intentional acts, nor does one demand moderation or justice in the report, nor does one return to research and investigation, allowing the reins to run free and letting the tongue graze in the pastures of lies, taking the signs of God as a joke and buying idle talk to mislead from the path of God. This is indeed a losing bargain. Among the weak reports of historians is what they all convey regarding the news of the Tuba kings of Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula, that they used to invade from their villages in Yemen to Africa and the Berbers of the Maghreb, and that Afrikash, son of Qais, son of Saifi, was one of their greatest kings, either during the time of Moses, peace be upon him, or shortly before him. He invaded Africa and inflicted heavy losses on the Berbers, and he is the one who named them by this name when he heard their chatter and said, "What is this babbling?" Thus, this name was taken from him, and they have called themselves by it ever since. When he returned from the Maghreb, tribes from Hamir settled there, mingling with its people, including the Sanhaja and Kutama. From this, Al-Tabari, Al-Jurjani, Al-Mas'udi, Ibn al-Kalbi, and Al-Bayli concluded that the Sanhaja and Kutama are from Hamir, which is rejected by the genealogists of the Berbers, and this is the correct view. Al-Mas'udi also mentioned that Dhul Azhar was one of their kings before Afrikash, and during the time of Solomon, peace be upon him, he invaded the Maghreb and conquered it. He similarly mentioned his son Yasser after him, stating that he reached the Valley of Sand in the Maghreb, but found no passage due to the abundance of sand. So he returned. They also speak of another Tuba, As'ad Abu Ka'b, who was during the time of the Kayanian kings, that he ruled Mosul and Azerbaijan, faced the Turks, defeated them, and inflicted heavy losses, then invaded them a second and third time. After that, he sent 3 of his sons to Persia, and to the lands of the Sogdian from the Turkic nations beyond the river, and to the lands of the Romans. The first conquered the land up to Samarkand and crossed the desert to China, where he found his second brother, who had invaded Samarkand, had preceded him there. They inflicted heavy losses in China, and both returned with spoils, leaving tribes from Hamir in China, who remain there to this day. The third reached Constantinople, conquered it, and subdued the lands of the Romans before returning. All these reports are far from being accurate, deeply rooted in delusion and error, and resemble fabricated tales. The kings of the Tuba were based in the Arabian Peninsula, with their seat in Sana'a, Yemen. The Arabian Peninsula is surrounded by the sea on three sides: the Indian Ocean to the south, the Persian Gulf leading to Basra to the east, and the Suez Sea leading to Suez from the regions of Egypt to the west, as seen in geographical maps. Thus, those travelling from Yemen to the Maghreb find no route other than through Suez, and the path there between the Suez Sea and the Levantine Sea is about 2 stages or less. It is unlikely that a great king with a large army would pass through this route without it being customary for him to have control over these regions. In those regions, there were the giants and Canaanites in the Levant and the Copts in Egypt. The giants ruled Egypt, and the children of Israel ruled the Levant. It has never been reported that the Tuba fought against any of these nations or ruled any of those regions. Moreover, the distance from the sea to the Maghreb is great, and the provisions and supplies for the armies are numerous. If they travelled through regions they did not control, they would need to plunder crops and livestock and seize lands along their way, which would not suffice for their provisions and supplies, as is customary. Even if they transported their supplies from their own regions, the mounts would not suffice for the transport, so they would have to pass through all their routes in regions they had conquered and subdued to obtain provisions from there. Even if we say that those armies could pass through these nations without provoking them, obtaining provisions through peaceful means would be even more unlikely and difficult. This indicates that these reports are weak or fabricated. As for the Valley of Sand, which is said to be impassable, it has never been mentioned in the Maghreb, despite the many who traverse it and those who recount its paths from travellers and villages in every era and every region. It is, as they describe, so strange that there are ample reasons to report it. As for their invasions of the eastern lands and the land of the Turks, although the route is wider than the paths of Suez, the distance here is greater, and the nations of Persia and Rome are obstructing it, unlike the Turks. It has never been reported that the Tuba ruled Persia or Rome. They only fought the people of Persia on the borders of Iraq and between the two seas, and in Al-Hira and the island between the Tigris and Euphrates. This occurred between Dulazar among them and Caicavus from the Kayanian kings, and between the lesser Tuba, Abu Kab, and the Kayanian kings and the Sassanids after them, in exceeding the land of Persia by invading the lands of the Turks and Tibet, which is usually impossible due to the obstructing nations among them, and the need for provisions and supplies with the distance involved, as mentioned. Thus, the reports regarding this are weak and flawed, and if they were accurate in transmission, it would still be a defect in them. How could they be accurate when they have not been transmitted from a reliable source? Ibn Ishaq's statement regarding the news of Yathrib and the Aws and Khazraj that the other Tuba marched to the east, carried into Iraq and Persia, and as for the lands of the Turks and Tibet, their invasion is not valid in any way, as established. Therefore, do not be deceived by what is presented to you from that, and reflect on the news and compare them to the correct standards, and you will find them clarified in the best way. And God is the guide to the right path. Additionally, and beyond that, and deeper in the illusion, is what the interpreters circulate in the interpretation of Surah Al-Fajr regarding the saying of God, "Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with Ad, the people of Iram, who had lofty pillars?" They make the word Iram a name for a city described as having pillars, and they narrate that Ad, the son of Aus, had 2 sons, Shaddid and Shaddad, who ruled after him. Shaddid perished, and the kingdom was left to Shaddad, and he was informed of the description of paradise, so he said, "I will build a city like it." And he built the city of Iram in the deserts of Aden, over a period of 300 years, and his age was 900 years. They say it was a great city, with palaces of gold and pillars of emerald and ruby, and it contained various types of trees and flowing rivers. When its construction was completed, he went there with the people of his kingdom, and when he was a day's journey away, God sent upon them a cry from the heavens, and they all perished. This was mentioned by Al-Tabari, Al-Thalibi, Al-Zamakhshari, and others among the interpreters. They also narrate from Abdullah ibn Qalaba, one of the companions, that he went out in search of his camels and found them, carrying what he could, and his news reached Muawiyah, who summoned him, and he recounted the story. He inquired about Ka'b al-Ahbar and asked him about it, and he said it is Iram, the city of pillars, and a red-haired, fair-skinned, short man with a mole on his eyebrow and a mole on his neck will enter it, who will go out in search of his camels. Then he turned and saw Ibn Qalaba and said, "This is indeed that man. This city has not been heard of since that day in any part of the earth, and the deserts of Aden, where they claim it was built, are in the middle of Yemen, and its construction has continued, and guides trace its paths from every direction. No news has been reported about this city, nor has anyone mentioned it, neither among historians nor among nations. If they had said it was lost among the remnants of ancient artifacts, it would have been more plausible, but their apparent words suggest it is still present. Some say it is Damascus, based on the claim that the people of Ad ruled it, and some of them go so far as to say it is hidden and will only be discovered by those engaged in sports and magic. All these claims are more akin to myths, and what led the interpreters to this was what the rules of grammar necessitated in the phrase, the city of pillars, that it is an attribute of Iram, and they interpreted pillars as referring to columns. It was necessary for it to be a building, and this was suggested to them by the reading of Ibn al-Zubayr, Ad Iram, in the genitive without tanween. Then they relied on those tales, which are more like fabricated stories that are closer to lies, and otherwise, pillars refers to the supports of tents or the tents themselves. If it is meant to refer to columns, there is no surprise in describing them as builders and people of columns in general due to their well-known strength, as it is a specific construction in a particular city or elsewhere. If it is added as in the reading of Ibn al-Zubayr, it is like adding a clan to a tribe, as one says Quraysh Kinana and Elias Mudar and Rabia Nizar. What necessity is there for this far-fetched interpretation that they have concocted to direct it towards such weak tales that the Book of God is far removed from, due to their distance from the truth? Among the fabricated tales for historians is what they all narrate regarding the reason for al-Rashid's downfall of the Barmakids, stemming from the story of his sister Al-Abasa, with Ja'far ibn Yahya ibn Khalid, his client, and that he was fond of their drinking together. He allowed them to marry without seclusion, eager for their company in his gathering, and that Al-Abasa devised a way to be alone with him due to her infatuation with him until she had relations with him, they claim while he was drunk, and she became pregnant, and this was reported to Al-Rashid, who became furious. How could that be from the position of Al-Abasa in her religion and her parents' dignity, and her being the daughter of Abdullah ibn Abbas, with only 4 men between her and him, who are the dignitaries of religion and the great ones of the community after him? Al-Abasa is the daughter of Muhammad al-Mahdi, the son of Abdullah Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the son of Muhammad al-Sajjad, the son of Ali Abu al-Khulafa, the son of Abdullah, the translator of the Quran, the son of Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the daughter of a caliph, the sister of a caliph, surrounded by royal power and the prophetic caliphate, and the companionship of the messenger and his relatives, and the establishment of the community and the light of revelation and the descent of angels from all directions, close in time to the Bedouin origins and the simplicity of religion, far from the customs of luxury and the pastures of immorality. So where can one seek chastity and purity if it has departed from her? Or where can cleanliness and intelligence be found if they are lost from her household? How can her lineage be joined to Ja'far ibn Yahya and her Arab nobility be sullied by a client of the Persians, or by the loyalty of her grandfather from the kin of the messenger and the dignitaries of Quraysh? The utmost they could claim is that their state was drawn to him and his father, and they extracted and elevated them to the ranks of the dignitaries. How could it be permissible for al-Rashid to marry into the clients of the non-Arabs, given the distance of his ambition and the greatness of his ancestors? If one were to reflect on this with a fair perspective and compare Al-Abasa to the daughter of a king among the great kings of her time, he would recoil from such a match with a client of their state and would find it repugnant and would insist on denying it. Where is the status of Al-Abasa and Al-Rashid among the people? The Barmakids were only brought down due to their usurpation of the state and their monopolization of tax revenues, to the extent that Al-Rashid would seek a small amount of money, and it would not reach him. They overpowered him in his affairs and shared in his authority, and he had no control over his kingdom's matters with them. Their influence grew, their reputation spread, and they populated the ranks of the state and its positions with their descendants and their creations, monopolizing it from others in ministry, writing, leadership, and the sword and pen. It is said that there were 25 leaders from the descendants of Yahya ibn Khalid in al-Rashid's court, among them sword-bearers and scribes, who jostled with the people of the state and pushed them away due to their father's position as the guardian of Harun, the heir apparent and caliph, until he grew up in his lap and matured in his nest and took control of his affairs, and he would call him, "O my father." Thus, the preference of the Sultan turned towards them, their influence grew, and their prestige expanded, and people's faces turned towards them, and their necks bowed to them, and hopes were limited to them, and gifts from kings and treasures from princes flowed towards them, and they infiltrated their treasuries in a bid for favour and influence, and they lavished gifts on the Shiites and the great relatives, and they overwhelmed them with favours and gained from the impoverished noble families, and freed the captives and praised them with praises that their caliph was not praised with, and they granted them rewards and gifts, and seized the villages and estates from the outskirts and cities in all the kingdoms until they angered the courtiers and incited the elite and choked the people of authority. Thus, the faces of rivalry and envy were revealed to them, and the scorpions of malice crept into their soft beds of the state, to the extent that the Banu Qataba, the maternal uncles of Jafar, were among the greatest of those who conspired against them, and the bonds of kinship did not soften them due to the malice that had settled in their hearts, nor did the ties of kinship restrain them. This coincided with their master's feelings of jealousy and disdain from the stone and pride, and the malice that was sent forth from them was the smallness of their influence. Their insistence on their affairs led them to major violations, such as their story regarding Yahya ibn Abdullah ibn Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Muhammad al-Mahdi, nicknamed the Pure Soul, who revolted against al-Mansur. This Yahya is the one whom al-Fadl ibn Yahya brought down from the lands of the Daylem under the protection of al-Rashid with his letter, and he offered them 1,000,000 dirhams, as mentioned by al-Tabari, and al-Rashid handed him over to Jafar and made his detention in his house and under his supervision. He imprisoned him for a while. Then, the influence led him to release him and take the reins of his freedom, claiming to protect the blood of the people of the house, in his opinion, and to influence the Sultan in his judgment. Al-Rashid asked him about him when he was informed of his betrayal, and he was aware and said, "I released him," and he showed him a face of approval and kept it to himself, thus creating a path for himself and his people until their throne was toppled, and their sky fell upon them, and the earth swallowed them, and their days became a lesson and an example for others. Whoever reflects on their news and investigates the history of their state and their conduct will find that it is a confirmed effect, well-established causes. Look at what Ibn Abdrabbi narrated in the conversation between al-Rashid and his grandfather Dawood ibn Ali regarding the reason for their downfall, and what he mentioned in the chapter on poets in the book Al-Aqd, in the dialogue of al-Asma'i with al-Rashid and al-Fadl ibn Yahya in their evening gatherings. You will understand that it was indeed jealousy and rivalry in usurping power from the caliph and those beneath him. Likewise, what their enemies conspired against them in the poetry they devised for the singers as a ploy to make it heard by the caliph and to stir his anger against them, as in the verse, "Would that hind would fulfill what she promised us, and relieve our souls from what we find, and let it be done all at once." for the truly incapable is the one who does not act. When Al-Rashid heard it, he said, "By God, I am indeed incapable," until they sent similar verses to provoke his jealousy and unleashed upon them the wrath of his vengeance. We seek refuge with God from the dominance of men and the evil of circumstances. As for what the tale suggests regarding Al-Rashid's drinking and the association of his drunkenness with that of his companions, far be it from God, we have not known him to be of such evil. And how does this compare to Al-Rashid's state and his fulfillment of what is required of the caliphate in terms of religion and justice, and what he was upon from the companionship of scholars and saints, and his dialogues with Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad, Ibn al-Samak and Al-Umari, and his correspondence with Sufyan al-Thawri, and his weeping from their sermons, and his supplication in Mecca during his circumambulation, and his dedication to worship and maintaining the times of prayers, and attending the dawn prayer at its earliest time? Al-Tabari and others narrated that he would pray 100 rak'ahs of voluntary prayer every day, and he would go on a campaign one year and perform Hajj the next. He rebuked Ibn Abi Maryam for his mockery during their evening gatherings, when he addressed him with something similar regarding prayer, when he heard him recite, "And why should I not worship the one who created me?" He said, "By God, I do not know why." Al-Rashid could not help but laugh, then turned to him angrily and said, "O Ibn Abi Maryam, in prayer too. Beware of the Quran and religion, and you may have whatever you wish after them." Furthermore, he was of such knowledge and simplicity due to his close ties to his predecessors who claimed such, and there was not much time between him and his grandfather Abu Ja'far. He left him as a young boy, and Abu Ja'far was well versed in knowledge and religion before and after the caliphate. He was the one who said to Malik, when he advised him to compile the Muwatta, "O Abu Abdullah, there is no one on the face of the earth more knowledgeable than me and you, and I have been preoccupied with the caliphate, so you write a book for the people that they may benefit from, avoiding the leniencies of Ibn Abbas and the strictness of Ibn Umar, and make it easy for the people." Malik said, "By God, he taught me the art of writing that day." His son, Al-Mahdi, who is this Al-Rashid, was known to avoid dressing his children in new clothes from the public treasury. One day, he entered upon him while he was in his assembly, attending to the tailors in mending the worn-out clothes of his children, and Al-Mahdi was repulsed by that and said, "O Commander of the Faithful, let me provide clothing for these children this year from my own allowance." He said to him, "You may do that." And he did not prevent him from it, nor did he allow spending it from the Muslims' funds. How could it be fitting for Al-Rashid, so close in time to this caliph and his fatherhood, and what he was raised upon from such conduct in his household and adopting it, to drink wine or to openly engage in it? The state of the nobility among the pre-Islamic Arabs in avoiding wine was well known, and it was not their tree of generosity, and drinking it was condemned by many of them. Al-Rashid and his ancestors were on a firm path of avoiding the condemned in their religion and worldly affairs, and embodying the praiseworthy qualities and attributes of perfection and the tendencies of the Arabs. Look at what Al-Tabari and Al-Mas'udi narrated regarding the story of Jibril ibn Bakhtiyush, the physician, when he brought fish to his table and protected himself from it, then ordered the table attendant to take it to his home. Al-Rashid noticed and became suspicious, and he sent his servant until he saw him taking it. Jibril prepared 3 pieces of fish in 3 cups, mixing one with meat seasoned with spices and vegetables and sweets, pouring ice water on the second, and pure wine in the third. He said about the first and second, "This is the food of the Commander of the Faithful, whether the fish is mixed with something or not." And about the third, "This is the food of Ibn Bakhtiyush." He handed it to the table attendant, and when Al-Rashid became aware and summoned him for reprimand, he brought the 3 cups, and he found the wine cup mixed and cloudy, while the other 2 had spoiled and changed in smell. Thus, he had an excuse in that, and it became clear from that Al-Rashid's state of avoiding wine was known among his entourage and the people at his table. It has been firmly established that he ordered the imprisonment of Abu Nuwas when he heard of his indulgence in drinking, until he repented and refrained. Al-Rashid would drink date wine, according to the opinions of the people of Iraq, and their fatwas regarding it are well known, As for pure wine, there is no way to accuse him of it, nor to follow the weak reports about it. The man was not one to engage in a major sin among the people of the community. All those people were far removed from committing excess and luxury in their clothing and adornments and all their consumables due to their roughness of Bedouin life and the simplicity of the religion that they had not abandoned. So what do you think about what goes beyond permissibility to prohibition, and from legality to illegality? The historians, Al-Tabari, Al-Mas'udi and others, have agreed that all those who proceeded from the caliphs of the Umayyads and Abbasids would only wear light adornments of silver in their belts, swords, bridles and saddles, and that the first caliph to introduce riding with gold adornments was Al-Mu'taz ibn al-Mutawakkil, the 8th caliph after Al-Rashid. Likewise, their state in their clothing was such. What do you think about their drinks? This becomes clearer if you understand the nature of the state in its early days of Bedouin simplicity, as we will explain in the issues of the first book, If God Wills. God is the guide to the truth. This is appropriate or close to what they all narrate about Yahya ibn Aktham, the judge of Al-Ma'mun and his companion, that he would drink wine and that he got drunk one night while drinking, and he was buried in the flowers until he regained consciousness, and they recite on his behalf, O my master, and the prince of all people, he has wronged in his judgment the one who used to give me drink. I was heedless of the cupbearer, so he made me, as you see me, devoid of reason and religion. The state of Ibn Aktham and Al-Ma'mun in this regard is different from that of Al-Rashid and their drinking, for it was only date wine and not prohibited for them. As for drunkenness, it was not their custom, and the companions of Al-Ma'mun were merely a trait in religion. It has been firmly established that he would sleep with him in the house, and it was reported in the virtues of Al-Ma'mun and his good companionship that he woke up one night thirsty and got up to feel around and look for the container, fearing to wake Yahya ibn Aktham. It was established that they both prayed the dawn prayer together. So where does this compare to drinking? Furthermore, Yahya ibn Aktham was among the elite of hadith scholars, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal praised him, as did Ismail the judge, and Al-Tirmidhi narrated his book Al-Jami. Al-Muzani, the hadith scholar, mentioned that Al-Bukhari narrated from him outside of Al-Jami. Thus, to criticize him is to criticize all of them. Likewise, what the commoners accuse him of leaning towards boys is a slander against God and a falsehood against the scholars, and they rely on the weak stories of the storytellers, which may be fabrications by his enemies, for he was envied for his perfection and his closeness to the Sultan. His status in knowledge and religion was free from such accusations. Ahmad ibn Hanbal was told what people were saying about him, and he said, "Glory be to Allah, glory be to Allah." Who says this? He denied it vehemently and praised him. Ismail the judge was asked what was said about him, and he said, God forbid that the justice of someone like him should be diminished by the lies of an envious person. He also said, Yahya ibn Aktham disavows Allah from having anything to do with what he was accused of regarding boys. I used to observe his private affairs, and I found him to be very fearful of Allah, but he had a sense of humour and good character. Thus he was accused by Ibn Hayyan among the trustworthy, and he said, Do not concern yourself with what is said about him, for most of it is not authentic. Among such stories is what Ibn Abd Rabbi, the author of Al-Aqd, narrated about the story of the basket regarding the reason for Al-Ma'mun's marriage to the daughter of Hassan ibn Sahal, and that he stumbled one night during his circumambulation in the streets of Baghdad on a basket hanging from some rooftops containing spoons and a silk thread. He took it, and the spoons shook, and he was taken up to a gathering of his kind, and he described the beauty of its furnishings, and the arrangement of its buildings, and the beauty of its view, which captivates the eye and possesses the soul. A woman appeared to him from behind the curtains in that gathering, charming in beauty and captivating in features, and she greeted him and invited him to join her. He continued to drink wine with her until morning, and returned to his companions in their place waiting for him. He had fallen in love with her, which prompted him to marry her father. Where is all this from the well-known state of Al-Ma'mun in his religion and knowledge, his following the path of the rightly guided caliphs from his ancestors, and his adherence to the conduct of the four caliphs, the pillars of the community, and his debates with scholars and his preservation of the limits of God in his prayers and rulings? How could such behavior be attributed to him, akin to the actions of the reckless and the debauched in their nighttime circumambulation, and their visits to homes, and their indulgence in the revelries of the lovers of the Bedouins? And where is that from the status of the daughter of Hassan ibn Sahal and her nobility? And what was in her father's house of protection and chastity? There are many such tales in the books of historians, and what drives them to fabricate and discuss them is their immersion in forbidden pleasures and the violation of the veil of the veiled women. They excuse themselves by emulating those who indulge in their pleasures. Therefore, you often find them reciting such news and digging into it when they peruse the pages of the records. If they had emulated them in other matters of their conduct and the praiseworthy qualities that are fitting for them, it would have been better for them if they only knew. I once reproached some princes from the royal family for their obsession with learning music and their passion for strings, and I said to him, "This is not your concern, nor is it fitting for your position." He replied, "Do you not see how Ibrahim ibn al-Mahdi was the master of this craft and the leader of the musicians of his time?" I said, "Glory be to Allah. Why did you not emulate his father or his brother? Did you not see how that kept Ibrahim from their positions?" He became deaf to my reproach and turned away. And God guides whom he wills. Among the weak reports is what many historians and chroniclers say about the Fatimids, the Shiite caliphs in Kairouan and Cairo, denying their lineage to the family of the Prophet, peace be upon them, and casting doubt on their connection to Ismail, the son of Jafar al-Sadiq. They rely on fabricated reports made for the weak among the Abbasid caliphs, flattering them by disparaging those who opposed them and indulging in gloating over their enemies, as some of these reports mention in their histories. They overlook the evidence of events and the signs of circumstances that necessitated the opposite, discrediting their claims and refuting them. They all agree in their narration about the origin of the Shiite state that Abu Abdullah al-Muhtasib, when he was called to Khatama for the approval of the family of Muhammad, and his news became famous, and he learned of the plotting against Abdullah al-Mahdi and his son Abu al-Qasim, fearing for themselves, so they fled from the east, the seat of the caliphate, and passed through Egypt. They left Alexandria disguised as merchants, and their news reached Isa al-Nushri, the governor of Egypt and Alexandria, who sent cavalry in pursuit of them. When they caught up with them, their true condition was concealed from their pursuers by the disguise they wore. They escaped to the Maghreb. Al-Mu'tadid instructed the Aghlabids, the princes of Ifriqiya in Kairouan, and the Banu Midra, the princes of Sijil Masa, to keep watch for them and to intensify their surveillance. Al-Yasha ibn Midra, from the Banu Midra, discovered their hidden location in his land and detained them to please the caliph. This was before the Shiites appeared against the Aghlabids in Kairouan. Then what happened afterward was the emergence of their call in the Maghreb and Ifriqiya, then in Yemen, then in Alexandria, then in Egypt, Syria, and the Hijaz, and they shared with the Abbasids in the kingdoms of Islam, almost encroaching upon their territories and threatening their affairs. The call was proclaimed in Baghdad and its surroundings by the Prince al-Basasiri, one of the Daylamites who dominated the Abbasid caliphs in a dispute that arose between him and the Persian princes, and he preached for them from their pulpits for a whole year. The Abbasids were overwhelmed in their position and their state, and the Umayyad kings were behind the sea, calling for woe and war against them. How could all this happen for a false claimant in lineage who lies in his assumption of power? Consider the case of the Karmatians, who were false in their claims of lineage. How quickly their call faded, their followers scattered, and their wickedness and deceit were exposed, leading to their ruin. If the matter of the Fatimids were the same, it would have been known, even after a while. And whatever a person possesses of character, even if he thinks it, is hidden from people, it is known. Their state lasted for about 270 years, and they ruled the place of Ibrahim, peace be upon him, his prayer place, the residence of the messenger, peace be upon him, his grave, the standing place of the pilgrims, and the descent of angels. Then their affair and their Shiites perished in all of that, fully obedient to them, loving them, and believing in the lineage of Imam Ismail, the son of Jafar al-Sadiq. They repeatedly emerged after the state fell and its traces faded, calling to their innovation, shouting the names of boys from their descendants, claiming their right to the caliphate, and asserting their appointment by the will of their predecessors among the imams. If they had doubted their lineage, they would not have risked their lives in their defense. The innovator does not disguise his matter, nor does he confuse his innovation, nor does he lie to himself about what he claims. It is astonishing that Judge Abu Bakr al-Bakilani, the chief of the theologians, would lean towards this weak opinion and see this feeble view. If this is due to their atheism in religion and their deep involvement in Rafidism, it does not negate the essence of their call. The proof of their lineage does not benefit them from God in their disbelief. God the Exalted said to Noah, "Peace be upon him," regarding his son, "Indeed, he is not of your family. He is a work of unrighteousness. So do not ask me about that of which you have no knowledge." And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said to Fatima, advising her, "O Fatima, act, for I cannot avail you against Allah in anything." Whenever a person knows a matter or is certain of it, he must declare it. God speaks the truth and guides to the right path. The people were in a position of suspicion regarding their states and under the control of tyrants due to the abundance of their Shiites and their spread in distant lands due to their call and their repeated revolts. Their leaders sought to hide, and they could hardly be recognized, as it was said, "If you were to ask the days what my name is, they would not know, and where my place is, they would not recognize my place." To the extent that Muhammad ibn Ismail, the Imam, the grandfather of Abdullah al-Mahdi, was nicknamed the Concealed by his Shiites due to their agreement on hiding him for fear of those who dominated them. The Abbasids used this to discredit their lineage, and they were pleased with this opinion, which was embraced by their allies and the princes of their state, who were engaged in wars with their enemies, using it to deflect the stigma of their inability to resist and defend against those who overpowered them in Syria, Egypt, and the Hijaz, from the Berbers, the concealed Shiites, and their followers. To the extent that the judges in Baghdad recorded their denial of this lineage, and among those who testified to this were prominent figures, including al-Sharif al-Razi, his brother al-Murtada, Ibn al-Batrawi, and among the scholars were Abu Hamid al-Asfaraini, al-Quduri, al-Saymari, Ibn al-Akfani, al-Abiwardi, and Abu Abdullah ibn al-Nu'man, the jurist of the Shiites, and others from the prominent scholars of the nation in a well-known day, that was in the year 460 AH during the reign of al-Qadir. Their testimony in this matter was based on what was widely known and recognized among the people of Baghdad, the majority of whom were Shiites of the Abbasids who disparaged this lineage. The historians transmitted it as they heard it and narrated it as they understood it, and the truth is behind it. In the book of Al-Mu'tadid regarding Abdullah to Ibn al-Aghlab in Qayrawan and Ibn Midrar in Sijil Masa, there is a more truthful witness and clearer evidence of the validity of their lineage. Al-Mu'tadid was more knowledgeable about the lineage of the family of the Prophet than anyone else, and the state and authority are a marketplace for knowledge, where the goods of sciences and crafts are brought, and the lost judgments are sought, and the news and reports are circulated. What is accepted in it is accepted by all. If the state refrains from oppression, bias, and frivolity, and follows the path of nations, then its pure gold and refined silver will be accepted in its market. If it goes with the whims and malice, and is swayed by the brokers of the Arabs, the falsehood will be accepted, and the discerning critic will weigh it with his scale of inquiry. Much more than this, and beyond it, is what the critics of the lineage of Idris ibn Abdullah ibn Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, may God be pleased with them, say regarding the Imam after his father in the far Maghreb, and God insinuate that the illegitimate child left by Idris the elder is Rashid, their client. May God curse them and distance them. Do they not know that Idris the elder had his in-laws among the Berbers, and that since he entered the Maghreb until God took him, he was deeply rooted in Bedouin life? The state of the Bedouins in such matters is not hidden, as they have no hidden places where suspicion can arise, and the conditions of their sanctuaries are all visible to their neighbours, and audible to their neighbours due to the closeness of their walls and the compactness of their buildings and the absence of divisions between their homes. Rashid was in charge of serving the entire sanctuary after his master, in the presence of their leaders and their Shiites, and under the watchful eyes of their supporters. The Berbers of the far Maghreb unanimously agreed to pledge allegiance to Idris the Younger after his father, and they gave him their obedience willingly and with agreement, pledging allegiance to him even unto death, and they faced the seas of death in his wars and campaigns. If they had ever entertained such suspicion, or heard it from an open enemy or a hypocrite, they would have refrained from it. But no, by God. These words only came from the Banu Abbas, their enemies, and from the Banu Aghlab, their governors in Ifriqiya. This is because when Idris the Elder fled to the Maghreb from the Battle of Balkh, Al-Hadi instructed the Aghlabids to keep watch for him and to intensify their surveillance. They did not succeed in capturing him, and he reached the Maghreb, and his affair was completed, and his call became apparent. Al-Rashid later appeared, despite what was clear about their client and their agent in Alexandria, who conspired for the Shiites to save Idris from the Maghreb, and he killed him. He sent al-Shamak, one of the clients of his father, to conspire to kill Idris. He pretended to follow him and to disavow the Banu Abbas, his clients. Idris embraced him and mingled with him, and in some of their private moments, al-Shamak gave him poison that consumed him. The news of his demise reached the Banu Abbas at the most opportune time, as they hoped to cut off the roots of the Shiite call in the Maghreb and eradicate its seed. When the news of the illegitimate child left by Idris reached them, they had no choice but to deny it. And behold, the call returned, and the Shiites in the Maghreb emerged, and their state was renewed with Idris the Younger. This was more painful for them than the impact of arrows, and failure and decline had descended upon the Arab state, preventing them from reaching the farthest regions. The extent of al-Rashid's ability to deal with Idris the Elder, given his position in the far Maghreb, and the support of the Berbers for him, was only to conspire to kill him with poison. At that time, they turned to their allies, the Aghlabids, in Ifriqiya, to close that gap on their side and to cut off the anticipated disease from their state before it could take root. Al-Ma'mun and his successors addressed them in this regard. The Aghlabids were more incapable than the Berbers of the far Maghreb, and they were in need of such a remedy for their kingship as the Abbasids were in need of the Berbers to close the gap in their state. The Aghlabids were in need of the Berbers of the far Maghreb to close that gap on their side and to cut off the anticipated disease from their state before it could take root. Al-Ma'mun and his successors addressed them in this regard. The Aghlabids were unable to compete with the Berbers of the far Maghreb and were in greater need of support from their kings, given the challenges the Abbasid Caliphate faced from the rise of foreign rulers who had taken control of the Caliphate, seizing power and implementing their own judgments over its people, wealth, officials, and policies. As one of their poets said, "A caliph in a cage, between Wasif and Buga, he says whatever they tell him, like a parrot, repeating words." The Aghlabid rulers feared the consequences of accusations and offered excuses. At times, they downplayed the significance of the Maghreb and its people, while at other times, they exaggerated the threat posed by Idris and his successors. They claimed he had overstepped his bounds, minting his own currency, sending gifts, and levying taxes, signalling his growing strength. They hinted at the danger of his rising power and warned of the challenge he posed, threatening to shift the allegiance of the people if forced. At other times, they attacked Idris's lineage with false accusations, attempting to lower his status. They didn't care about proving the truth of these claims, as they relied on the distance between them and the Abbasid caliphs, who, with their Persian rulers, were willing to believe whatever was told to them and listen to every rumour. This tactic continued until the Aghlabid rule came to an end. The false accusation about Idris's lineage spread to the ears of the masses, and some detractors latched onto it, using it as a weapon against his successors in times of rivalry. May God curse them for abandoning the goals of the Sharia, for there is no contradiction between what is certain and what is speculative. Idris was born in his father's bed, and the child belongs to the bed. Moreover, the purification of al-Bayt, the Prophet's family, from such false accusations is a belief of the faithful. God, the Exalted, has removed all impurity from them and purified them thoroughly. The bed of Idris is pure from any defilement, and whoever believes otherwise bears the sin and walks through the gates of disbelief. I have gone into detail in this rebuttal to close the doors of doubt and refute the envious accusations that I have personally heard from those who falsely attack his lineage, claiming to base their accusations on the writings of some historians of the Maghreb who were biased against al-Bayt and doubted the faith of their ancestors. However, the position of Idris and his descendants is far above such things and is protected from them. To deny them purity, where purity is beyond question, is itself a flaw. Yet I have argued on their behalf in this world, and I hope they will defend me on the day of judgment. Be aware that most of those who question their lineage are envious of the descendants of Idris, whether they claim descent from al-Bayt themselves or are outsiders. Claiming such a noble lineage is a significant source of pride for the nations and generations across the world, and this often leads to suspicion. However, the lineage of the descendants of Idris in their lands, from Persia to the regions of the Maghreb, has reached a level of fame and clarity that is beyond dispute. Their ancestry has been passed down from generation to generation, and their family is the one that founded Fez. Their mosque is adjacent to their neighborhood, and the sword of their ancestor Idris is displayed at the top of the great minaret in their city. His other relics have been reported so widely that they have nearly reached the level of direct observation. When others who claim this noble lineage see what God has granted the descendants of Idris, such as the prestige of their prophetic lineage and the majesty of the kingdom their ancestors established in the Maghreb, they realize they cannot compare. They see that they cannot reach even a fraction of what the descendants of Idris have achieved. The best they can do is accept their status, as people are generally trusted in matters of their ancestry, and there is a vast difference between knowledge, doubt, certainty, and acceptance. Recognizing this truth within themselves, many of them choke on their own envy, wishing they could reduce the descendants of Idris to commoners and strip them of their nobility, driven by jealousy. This leads them to persist in their hostility, fabricating lies and making baseless accusations in an attempt to create doubt where none exists. However, such efforts are in vain. As far as we know, there is no one in the Maghreb whose lineage is as pure and clear as that of the descendants of Idris from the line of Al-Hassan. The leaders of this time are the Banu Imran in Fes, descendants of Yahya al-Hawti, Ibn Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Awwam, Ibn al-Qasim, Ibn Idris. They are the leaders of Ahl al-Bayt, the family of the Prophet, there residing in the house of their ancestor Idris, and they hold authority over all the people of the Maghreb, as we will mention when discussing the Idrisids, God willing. Added to these corrupt claims and weak ideas is what is being spread by some narrow-minded jurists of the Maghreb who attack Imam al-Mahdi, founder of the Almohad state. They accuse him of sorcery and deception in his efforts to uphold true monotheism and condemn the oppressive rulers who preceded him. They deny all of his claims, including the Almohad's belief in his descent from al-Bayt. What drove these jurists to deny him was the envy that hid in their hearts because they saw him challenging their authority in matters of knowledge, religious rulings, and faith. Although they believed themselves to be his equals, he surpassed them by being followed and respected, with people listening to his words. This provoked their envy, and they sought to diminish him by attacking his beliefs and denying his claims. Furthermore, they had enjoyed favor and honor from the Lamtuna rulers, his enemies, who held them in high esteem because of their simplicity and adherence to religion. The scholars held positions of prominence in their state, serving as advisors in their localities according to their status, and so they became supporters of the Lamtuna rulers and enemies of al-Mahdi. They resented al-Mahdi for opposing them and exposing their faults, aligning themselves with the Lamtuna out of loyalty to their state. What can be said about a man who opposed the rulers for their corrupt practices, defied the jurists of his time, and called his people to fight against them in jihad? He overthrew the state from its foundations, turning its highest point into its lowest, at the height of its power, strength, and support. In the process, countless followers of his movement gave their lives, an uncountable number known only to their creator. They pledged their loyalty to him unto death, protecting him with their lives and seeking closeness to God by sacrificing themselves for the cause of this movement. They worked tirelessly to spread his message, which eventually overcame all other ideas and toppled two major states. Al-Mahdi himself lived in a state of austerity and deprivation, patiently enduring hardships and reducing his worldly possessions until God took him, leaving him with nothing in terms of wealth or worldly gains. He did not even have children, which most people desire. What, then, could his motivation have been, if not for the sake of God? He did not gain anything in this world. If his intentions had not been pure, his mission would not have succeeded, for this is God's way with his servants. As for those who deny his lineage from al-Bayt, they have no valid argument. Even if he claimed it and was known for it, there is no evidence to refute it, for people are generally trusted regarding their lineage. They may argue that leadership should not be given to those outside their own people, as is generally true, as explained in the first chapter of this book. However, Al-Mahdi became the leader of the Masmuda tribes, who followed him and submitted to him and his Haga group. God's will was fulfilled through his movement. It should be understood that this claim of Fatimid lineage was not the basis of Al-Mahdi's success, nor did people follow him because of it. Instead, they followed him due to the solidarity of the Haga and Masmuda tribes to which he belonged, and the depth of his roots within them. The Fatimid lineage was obscure and forgotten by the people, known only to him and his close relatives, and passed down among them. His original lineage had almost faded away, and he adopted the identity of these tribes, rising among them. His original ancestry did not harm his leadership because it was unknown to the tribal group that supported him. Such situations are common when the original lineage is obscure. Consider the case of Arfaja and Jaria, competing for the leadership of the Bajila tribe. Arfaja was originally from the Azd tribe, but he adopted the identity of Bajila so completely that he contested the leadership with Jaria during the time of Umar, may God be pleased with him, as is well known. This helps us understand the truth of the matter, and God is the guide to the right path. We have nearly strayed from the purpose of this book by delving deeply into these misunderstandings, as many reliable scholars and historians have stumbled into such errors. These ideas were passed on by those with weak understanding, who accepted them without investigation or reflection. They became part of their recorded traditions, making the study of history weak and confused, causing those who examine it to be perplexed, leading to its treatment as a common and trivial pursuit. A true historian needs knowledge of the principles of politics, the nature of existence, the differences between nations, regions, and eras, in terms of customs, ethics, beliefs, and other conditions. They must understand the present and compare it with the past, recognizing both the similarities and differences, and explaining the reasons behind both. A historian must also understand the origins of states and religions, the reasons for their rise, the factors that contributed to their formation, and the conditions of their leaders and their histories. Only then can the historian fully comprehend the reasons behind each event they document. At that point, a historian must compare the transmitted report with the established principles and fundamentals they possess. If the report aligns with those principles and follows their logic, then it is considered accurate. Otherwise, it is discarded as unreliable. This is why the early scholars held the study of history in such high regard. Figures like Al-Tabari, Al-Bukhari, and Ibn Ishaq before them, along with other scholars of the Ummah. Unfortunately, many have lost sight of this key aspect of history, and as a result, its study has been reduced to a field of ignorance. Common people and those lacking deep knowledge treat it lightly, skimming through it, engaging with it superficially, and venturing into it without proper understanding. Consequently, the true and the false, the essential and the trivial, have become mixed, and only God knows the ultimate fate of all things. One of the hidden pitfalls in the study of history is the failure to recognize the gradual change in the conditions of nations and generations as times and eras pass. This is a subtle and deeply concealed issue, only becoming apparent after many centuries. Only a few individuals can perceive it. The conditions of the world, its peoples and their customs and beliefs do not remain constant, nor do they follow a fixed path. Instead, They shift over time, evolving from one state to another. Just as this happens with individuals, moments in time, and cities, it also occurs across regions, lands, epochs, and states. This is God's established way with his servants. In the past, there were nations such as the early Persians, the Syriac peoples, the Nabateans, the Himyarites, the Israelites, and the Egyptians, who each had their distinct customs in their states, kingdoms, governance, industries, languages, and practices, as well as their specific ways of inhabiting the world, evidenced by the remnants they left behind. After them came the Second Persian Empire, the Romans, and the Arabs, and with them came new changes. Their customs were either aligned with the previous ones or contrasted greatly with them. Then came Islam, with the rise of the Mudari state, the Quraysh, and with it, a complete transformation of all previous conditions. Many of the older traditions were replaced by new ones, passed down from the earlier generations to the later ones. Then the era of the Arabs came to an end, their great days passed, and the forefathers who built their honor and established their kingdoms vanished. Power was transferred to others, such as the Turks in the east, the Berbers in the Maghreb, and the Franks in the north. With the departure of these early peoples, their traditions and ways of life were forgotten, and their significance was neglected. The most common cause for these shifts in customs and traditions is that the habits of each generation follow those of their rulers. As the saying goes, people follow the religion of their king. When rulers and those in power take control of a state, they inevitably adopt many of the customs of their predecessors while introducing some of their own. This leads to minor differences from the original customs. When another state arises after them and blends the previous customs with its own, even more differences emerge. Over time, these differences increase until the customs of one era are entirely distinct from those of the original generation. As long as nations and generations succeed one another in power and authority, these shifts in customs and traditions will continue to occur. Analogy and imitation are known human tendencies, but they are prone to lead a person into error when they become distracted or forget their purpose. When someone hears many stories of the past, they may not recognize the changes in conditions and circumstances, and might apply them immediately to what they are familiar with, comparing them to what they have experienced. However, there could be significant differences between the two, leading to serious mistakes. An example of this is what historians report about the life of Al-Hajjaj, saying that his father was a teacher. In our current era, teaching is considered one of the common professions for earning a livelihood, far removed from the honor associated with tribal nobility. A teacher is often seen as a weak and humble figure, disconnected from prestigious social roots. Many individuals from humble backgrounds, or those involved in trades and livelihoods, may aspire to attain ranks for which they are not suited. Their ambitions may lead them to dangerous pursuits, causing them to fall into ruin without realizing that such aspirations are beyond their reach. In early Islam and during the reigns of the first two caliphates, teaching and knowledge were not professions in the sense they are today. Knowledge was not considered a craft or trade. It was simply the transmission of what had been heard from the Prophet and the teaching of religious matters as a form of communication and guidance. Those who conveyed the Quran and the Sunnah were from noble families and tribes that upheld Islam. They taught as a form of conveying a message, not as a profession, since the Quran was revealed to their own people, who upheld Islam as their faith, fought for it, and were honored by it among all nations. Therefore, they were eager to transmit and explain it to the community, unrestrained by pride or honor. The Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, sent his senior companions to the delegations of Arabs to teach them the principles of Islam and the laws he brought. He sent out 10 of his companions and then others, and Islam spread and took root through them. As Islam became more established and the roots of the faith deepened, it was passed down to distant nations from its original people. Over time, the conditions of the world changed, and the need for deriving legal rulings from religious texts increased due to the growing number of cases and their complexities. This required a system to protect against errors, and knowledge became a skill that required learning. As a result, Knowledge eventually transformed into a profession, as will be discussed in the chapter on knowledge and education. The people of noble lineage became preoccupied with the responsibilities of kingship and governance, leaving the pursuit of knowledge to others. Knowledge then became a means of livelihood, and the affluent and those in power distanced themselves from education, leaving it primarily to the weaker segments of society. Consequently, the pursuit of knowledge became undervalued by those with tribal prestige and authority. As for Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, his father was one of the nobles and leaders of the Thaqif tribe, and their status among the Arab tribes and their rivalry with Quraysh in terms of honor is well known. His teaching of the Quran was not a profession for livelihood as it is in today's context, but rather aligned with the original approach of early Islam. What I have described was the original situation in early Islam. Similarly, those who read history books and hear about the judges who held leadership roles in wars and led armies may mistakenly think that the judicial office today is as it was in the past. They imagine that the position of judgeship today is the same as it was before, and, for example, they may believe that figures like Ibn Abi Amir, the ruler who dominated Hisham, or Ibn Abbad, one of the kings of the Taifa states in Seville, were similar to the judges of our current era when they hear that their ancestors were judges. However, they fail to recognize the significant changes in the judicial role and customs, as I will explain in the chapter on judges in the first book. Ibn Abi Amir and Ibn Abbad were from the Arab tribes that supported the Umayyad state in Andalusia, and their tribal status within the state was well known. They did not achieve their leadership and kingship solely through the judicial office as it is today. In earlier times, the role of judges was held by those who belonged to the powerful tribes that supported the state, just as the position of ministry today, in Morocco, is held by people with strong tribal affiliations and loyalty to the state. Consider how these judges, in the past, led armies and took on major responsibilities, which were only given to those with the necessary tribal strength. Those who misunderstand these historical details and assume they are equivalent to modern-day circumstances often fall into error, particularly people in Andalusia today, who have been without tribal unity and strength for a long time since the decline of the Arabs and their states there. They have lost the power and solidarity of tribal alliances, leaving only the preservation of their Arab lineage, while lacking the means of tribal strength and mutual support. Instead, they have become like ordinary subjects, submitting to oppression and accepting humiliation. They mistakenly believe that their noble lineage alone, mixed with the current political environment, will give them power and control. Thus, you find many of them, especially those in trades and crafts, striving for power. However, those who have experienced life among tribes and understand the importance of solidarity and power in the Western regions, the Maghreb, rarely make such mistakes when considering these matters. Historians often follow a particular pattern when documenting states and their rulers. They mention the ruler's name, lineage, father, mother, wives, title, seal, judge, chamberlain, and vizier. This approach is an imitation of the historians of earlier states, without paying attention to the original purpose of such records. Historians of that era wrote for the people of the state and their descendants, who were eager to learn about the lives of their ancestors in order to follow in their footsteps, even in matters of appointing officials and giving ranks to the sons of their officials and those loyal to them. The judges, too, were part of the state's ruling class, just as ministers were, as we have mentioned before. Hence, it was necessary for historians to include all this information. However, as states and eras changed, the focus shifted toward knowing the kings themselves, understanding the power of each state, and how they compared to other nations. What benefit is there for a historian in this time to document the sons, wives, seal inscriptions, titles, judges, chamberlains, and viziers of a long-gone state whose origins, lineages, and ranks are no longer known? This practice of copying from earlier historians without understanding their intentions has caused historians to lose sight of the true purpose of history. The only exceptions to this might be when referring to ministers who left a significant legacy, whose actions overshadowed the rulers themselves, like Al-Hajjaj, the Banu al-Muhallab, the Barmakids, the Banu Sa'al ibn Nobakht, Kafur al-Ikhshidi, Ibn Abi Amir and others. In these cases, mentioning their ancestors and their conditions is acceptable, as they are considered among the ranks of kings. Here, we will conclude this discussion with a useful point. History is primarily the recounting of events specific to a particular era or generation. However, describing the general conditions of the lands, generations, and times is the foundation upon which most historical objectives are built, and it clarifies historical accounts. In earlier times, people wrote dedicated works about this, as Al-Mas'udi did in his book Muruj al-Dahab, where he described the conditions of the nations and lands of his time during the early 300s AH, 10th century CE, covering both the West and the East. He detailed their beliefs, customs, described cities, mountains, seas, kingdoms, and states, and distinguished between the Arab and non-Arab peoples. As a result, he became a leading authority among historians, to whom later scholars referred, and his work became a primary source for verifying much historical information. After him came Al-Kabri, who did something similar but focused on routes and realms, travel and geography, without delving into other matters, as the nations and generations of his time had not undergone significant changes or major transitions. However, in our current era, at the end of the 8th century AH, 14th century CE, the conditions in the Maghreb, which we have witnessed, have completely changed. The people, previously dominated by the Berber generations, were replaced by the Arabs, who overpowered and displaced them, starting in the 5th century AH. The Arabs took over most of the lands and shared control over the remaining cities. In addition, the devastating plague that struck the world in the mid-8th century AH ravaged entire populations, wiping out entire generations and erasing much of civilization's beauty. It struck at a time when the states were already in decline, having reached the end of their lifespan. The plague diminished their strength, weakened their authority, and hastened their collapse. The Earth's development declined along with the population, leading to the ruin of cities, buildings, roads, and landmarks. Towns and homes were emptied, states and tribes weakened, and populations changed. I imagine that the East may have experienced something similar to what has happened in the Maghreb, though on a smaller scale, given the size of its population. It is as if the voice of nature called out for retreat and withdrawal, and the world responded. Only God is the inheritor of the earth and all that is on it. When the conditions of the world change entirely, it is as if a new creation emerges, a fresh beginning for a new era. Thus, there is a need in this time for someone to document the current state of the world, the people, the lands, and the generations, much like Al-Mas'udi did for his era. This would serve as a foundation for future historians. I will mention in this book what I can regarding this region of the Maghreb, either explicitly or implicitly, through its news and hints, as my focus in this work is on the Maghreb and its peoples, kingdoms, and states. I will not address other regions, as I lack detailed knowledge of their current conditions, and transmitted reports do not suffice to achieve the clarity I seek. Al-Mas'udi managed to gather such information because of his extensive travels, as he mentioned in his work. However, even when he mentioned the Maghreb, his coverage was incomplete. Beyond every knowledgeable person is one more knowledgeable, and all knowledge ultimately belongs to God. Humans are weak and fallible, and acknowledging this is a duty. Whoever is assisted by God will find his paths made easy and his efforts successful. We now proceed, with God's help, to fulfill our intentions in this work. May God grant us success and support, for He is our reliance and trust.